Jungkook's heart shatters after seeing Jimin place a ring on someone else's finger, forcing buried feelings into the open. The silver ring slipped gently onto another man's finger. For one endless heartbeat, Jungkook forgot how to breathe. The applause around him echoed like distant thunder inside the elegant ballroom, but every sound dissolved into a dull roar as his eyes remained locked on Jimin's trembling hands. Warm golden lights reflected from the crystal chandeliers above, making the polished ring sparkle like a cruel promise that had never belonged to anyone else. That ring, it was supposed to be his fingers curled into fists before he even realized it. The champagne glass in his hand cracked slightly beneath the pressure, a thin line spreading across the crystal surface. He didn't notice the sting as a shard nicked his palm. He only watched Jimin smile. It wasn't a wide smile. It wasn't the bright smile Jimin used whenever he laughed too hard or teased his friends. This one was quiet, restrained, almost fragile, as though he was forcing himself to look stronger than he truly felt. The man receiving the ring lowered his head with visible gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered. Jimin nodded gently. "You deserve to have it." Those 5 words pierced Jungkook more deeply than any knife ever could, because for years he had imagined hearing them himself. The ballroom was filled with soft classical music, expensive perfume, and the sweet fragrance of fresh white lilies decorating every table. Outside, rain tapped gently against enormous glass windows, turning the city lights into blurred streaks of gold and blue. Everyone else believed they were witnessing a touching gesture between old friends. Only Jungkook knew what that ring meant, or at least, he believed he did. His memories dragged him backward, 3 years earlier. A tiny jewelry shop hidden between narrow streets had sheltered him and Jimin from a sudden summer storm. They had entered laughing, dripping rainwater onto the wooden floor while an elderly jeweler smiled warmly from behind the counter. Jimin had stopped in front of a simple silver ring. No diamonds, no extravagant design, just 2 delicate lines crossing each other before joining into one. "It's beautiful," Jimin had whispered. The old jeweler smiled knowingly. "People usually buy this ring for someone they never want to lose." Jungkook remembered the strange silence that had followed. Jimin had stared at the ring longer than necessary. "If someone gave you this," Jungkook had asked carefully, "would you accept it?" Instead of answering, Jimin simply smiled. "It depends." What? Whether they stay? That answer had haunted Jungkook ever since, because he hadn't stayed. A week later, he had accepted an overseas opportunity without explaining why he needed to leave so suddenly. Everyone believed he had chosen ambition. The truth was uglier. His father had forced the decision. The company had been collapsing beneath hidden debt. Powerful investors demanded absolute loyalty. Jungkook had been told that remaining close to Jimin would only place him in danger. He had obeyed, without saying goodbye properly, without confessing anything, without giving Jimin any reason to wait. Years passed, distance became habit, silence became punishment. Yet every birthday, every holiday, every lonely evening in another country, Jungkook found himself opening the same photograph. Jimin laughing beneath cherry blossoms, hair dancing in the spring wind, eyes brighter than the afternoon sky. He never deleted it, never could. Now he stood only a few meters away, close enough to hear Jimin's voice, far enough to realize how much had changed. Someone touched Jungkook's shoulder. "Okay," Taehyung's voice carried genuine concern. Jungkook blinked. "I'm fine." "You've been staring at Jimin for almost 10 minutes. I said I'm fine." Taehyung followed Jungkook's gaze, his expression softened. "So, you finally understand." Jungkook frowned. "Understand what?" "That some regrets don't disappear." Jungkook looked away. "I don't regret leaving." Lie tasted bitter. Taehyung sighed. "Spent 3 years pretending. I had reasons." "I know, you don't know everything." Taehyung admitted quietly. "But I know every time Jimin laughed after you left, his eyes never smiled." Those words struck harder than anything else that evening. Across the ballroom, Jimin excused himself from the gathering and stepped outside onto the rain-soaked terrace. Without thinking, Jungkook followed. Cool night air wrapped around him immediately. Rainwater collected along the marble railing while distant traffic hummed beneath dark clouds. The scent of wet earth filled the silence between them. Jimin never turned around. "I wondered how long it would take." Jungkook froze. "You knew I was here. I recognized your footsteps." A sad smile appeared on Jimin's face. "You still walked too quietly." For several seconds neither spoke. Finally Jungkook found his voice. "Ring." Jimin looked toward the city lights. "What about it? You gave it away." "I thought." He couldn't finish. Jimin waited patiently. "You thought it was meant for you." The honesty in that question stole every prepared excuse. Jungkook lowered his eyes. "Yes," Jimin laughed softly, not because it was funny, because sometimes laughing hurt less than crying. "You disappeared without telling me why." "I couldn't tell you. You didn't even try." "I wanted to." "You chose silence." Each sentence landed gently. Each one hurt more than shouting ever could. Jungkook finally looked into Jimin's eyes. For the first time he noticed the exhaustion hidden beneath them, dark circles, faint scars of sleepless nights. Pain carefully buried beneath calm expressions. Jimin had changed, not because time had passed, because loneliness had reshaped him. "Man I gave that ring to," Jimin said quietly, "saved my mother's life." Jungkook blinked. "What?" "When she needed emergency surgery, nobody would help us. Banks refused. Friends disappeared." His voice remained steady. He sold the only house he owned to pay for it. Jungkook's heartbeat slowed. It wasn't. No, Jimin smiled faintly. It wasn't a proposal. Silence stretched between them. Rain continued falling around the terrace. For the first time that night, Jungkook realized how quickly jealousy had convinced him to believe the worst. Yet relief refused to come, because another question remained. If it wasn't a proposal, Jimin looked down at his empty hand. Then why does it still hurt? Jimin closed his eyes. Because that ring reminded me of a promise someone once asked me about. Jungkook felt every muscle tense. Person who asked. Jimin whispered, never came back until it was already too late. Neither of them moved. The city below continued living, as though two broken hearts weren't standing beneath the rain, separated not by distance anymore, but by years of unanswered words. For the first time since returning home, Jungkook understood that losing someone rarely happened in a single moment. Sometimes it happened quietly, one unanswered call, one delayed confession, one silent goodbye, and sometimes it began with a ring that was never truly meant for anyone else. Morning arrived wrapped in a pale grey sky, but the heaviness inside Jungkook refused to fade. He had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same image, the silver ring resting on another person's finger, followed by Jimin's quiet confession beneath the rain. It had not been a proposal, it had been gratitude. Yet the truth brought him no peace. If anything, it hurt even more, because now he knew he had never lost Jimin to another man. He had lost him to his own silence. Jungkook stood alone on the balcony of his apartment, a cup of untouched coffee cooling in his hand. The city below was already alive with rushing traffic, distant sirens, and the rhythmic hum of commuters beginning another ordinary day. Nothing about his day felt ordinary. His phone vibrated. Taehyung, been awake all night, haven't you? Jungkook answered with silence. Take that as a yes. Another pause followed before Taehyung spoke again. Meet me at the old Riverside Cafe. An hour later, Jungkook pushed open the cafe's weathered wooden door. The familiar scent of roasted coffee beans and warm bread immediately surrounded him. Soft jazz floated through the quiet room while rain continued tapping against the windows. Taehyung was already waiting. You look terrible, he said bluntly. Feel worse. Taehyung slid a small brown envelope across the table. Kept this for 3 years. Jungkook frowned. What is it? I promised someone I wouldn't give it to you unless you came back on your own. His heartbeat quickened. The envelope was worn around the edges, as though it had been opened countless times before being carefully sealed again. On the front, written in familiar handwriting, were only 2 words. For Jungkook, his hands trembled. Slowly, he unfolded the letter inside. The paper carried the faint scent of lavender, Jimin's favorite. If you're reading this, the letter began, then maybe fate finally became kinder than we were. Jungkook swallowed hard. I wanted to hate you after you left. I tried. I told myself that forgetting you would be easier than waiting for someone who never explained why he disappeared. His vision blurred, but every season reminded me of you. Every song, every rainy afternoon. His fingers tightened around the page. I don't know whether you left because you stopped caring or because life forced you away. I stopped asking myself that question a long time ago. A tear landed on the paper. Only hope that wherever you are, you found something worth sacrificing us for. The final sentence shattered what little composure Jungkook had left. If one day you return, don't apologize because you pity me. Only come back if you're willing to stay. Jungkook lowered the letter. His shoulders shook as years of restrained emotion finally surfaced. Never knew, he whispered. Taehyung looked out the window. He wrote that 6 months after you left. Didn't you send it? Because he never wanted to burden you. Jungkook laughed bitterly through his tears. He protected me even after I abandoned him. You didn't abandon him. Feels the same. Taehyung leaned forward, then stopped living like the man who left. Stared silently at the letter. I can't change the past. No, maybe I can change what comes next. Taehyung smiled for the first time that morning. That's the first honest thing you've said in years. Across the city, Jimin was arranging flowers inside the small community center where he volunteered every weekend. Children ran through the hallway with bright laughter, filling the old building with warmth. One little girl tugged gently on his sleeve. Teacher Jimin, yes, why do you always smile even when your eyes look sad? Innocent question caught him off guard. He knelt until he was at her height. Sometimes people smile because they don't want others to worry. She tilted her head. But who makes you smile? Jimin hesitated. For a moment, he had no answer. Then another volunteer entered the room. Jimin, someone's here asking for you. His heartbeat skipped. He stepped into the entrance hall. Standing there, dressed simply in a dark coat still damp from the rain, was Jungkook. There were no expensive gifts, no flowers, no rehearsed speech. Only a folded letter clutched tightly in his hand. Their eyes met across the quiet hallway. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. The laughter of children echoed softly in the background while sunlight finally broke through the clouds outside, casting gentle beams across the wooden floor. Jungkook took one slow step forward, then another. When he finally stopped in front of Jimin, his voice was barely above a whisper. I read your letter. Jimin's expression froze. Have it? Jungkook nodded. I'm sorry it took me 3 years. Jimin looked down, exhaling slowly as emotions he had buried for so long threatened to resurface. I wasn't waiting for an apology. I know. I was waiting to see whether the person I loved would ever find his way home. Jungkook felt tears sting his eyes once more. For the first time in years, neither of them hid behind pride, excuses, or silence. They simply stood there, facing the distance that time had built between them, both realizing that healing would not come from forgetting the past, but from having the courage to walk through it together. Jungkook remained standing in front of Jimin, the folded letter still trembling in his hand. Neither of them spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence shared by two people who had once known every unspoken thought the other carried, yet now struggled to find the first honest word after years apart. The children's laughter gradually faded as the volunteers led them into another room for their afternoon activities. The hallway became quiet, filled only with the soft ticking of an old clock mounted above the entrance. Jimin glanced at the letter. "I never thought you'd actually read it. I wish I'd read it 3 years ago." Jimin gave a faint smile. "So do I." For a moment, Jungkook almost reached for Jimin's hand but stopped himself. He had no right to assume that kind of closeness still existed. "Owe you the truth," Jungkook said quietly. Jimin looked at him without interruption. "My father forced me to leave." Jimin's expression remained calm, but his eyes sharpened. "He discovered that someone was threatening our company. They wanted information, money, and leverage." Jungkook inhaled slowly. "They investigated everyone close to me." A memory flashed across his mind. Men in dark suits waiting outside his family's home, confidential files spread across a polished table, his father's exhausted face. "They knew about you." Jimin frowned. "They believed hurting you would make me cooperate, so you disappeared." "I thought disappearing would protect you." Jimin lowered his eyes. "You made that decision alone." "I did. Never trusted me enough to let me choose." Jungkook had no defense. "I know. I spent years believing I wasn't enough." His voice remained soft, but every word carried the weight of countless sleepless nights. "I wondered if I'd said something wrong, if I loved you too much, or not enough." Jungkook felt his chest tighten. "It was never because of you." That's exactly what silence makes people believe. Those words settled heavily between them. Jungkook realized that pain was not only caused by what happened, sometimes it was created by everything left unsaid. "I'm sorry," he whispered again. Jimin looked toward the window where sunlight now poured into the hallway. "Do you know what the hardest part was?" Jungkook shook his head. "I stopped being angry." His answer surprised Jungkook. "I thought anger would last forever." Jimin smiled sadly. "But eventually, all that remained was missing you." Confession lingered in the air. Jungkook felt tears threaten once more. "I missed you every single day." Jimin looked into his eyes, searching for any trace of the boy he had loved years ago. He found him, not in Jungkook's confident posture, not in his expensive clothes, but in the guilt that softened his voice and the vulnerability he no longer tried to hide. A volunteer approached them with a warm smile. "Jimin, the children are asking if you'll tell today's story." Jimin nodded. "Be there in a minute." Volunteer politely excused herself, leaving them alone again. Jungkook hesitated. "I should go." "You don't have to." Jungkook blinked. Jimin folded his arms loosely. "If you're serious about staying this time, then don't disappear after one conversation." The words carried neither accusation nor expectation, only a quiet invitation. Jungkook smiled for the first time in years. "I won't." Jimin studied him for another moment before turning toward the classroom. "You can watch if you want." Jungkook followed him inside. Nearly 20 children sat in a circle on a colorful carpet, their bright eyes immediately turning toward the unfamiliar visitor. One little boy raised his hand. "Teacher Jimin, who's he?" Jimin paused. He looked at Jungkook, then answered with complete honesty. "Someone important from a long time ago." Children accepted the answer without another question. Jimin opened a picture book and began reading. As his gentle voice filled the room, Jungkook watched him interact with every child, with patience, kindness, and quiet warmth. This was the life Jimin had built while he was gone, a life filled with people who depended on him, a life that continued despite heartbreak. For the first time, Jungkook understood that asking for forgiveness was only the beginning. Trust could not be restored through apologies alone. It had to be earned through consistency, patience, and the willingness to remain present, even when doing so was difficult. As the afternoon sunlight bathed the classroom in a golden glow, Jungkook silently made himself a promise. He could not rewrite the years they had lost, but if Jimin allowed it, he would spend every day ahead proving that this time he would stay.
The following Saturday arrived with clear skies, the kind of peaceful morning that made the city seem gentler than usual. Jungkook stood outside the community center nearly 20 minutes early. In his hands was a simple paper bag from a neighborhood bakery. Inside were warm butter rolls and sweet red bean pastries. He remembered, years ago, whenever Jimin felt nervous before an important day, he always bought the same pastries. "I eat sweets when I'm worried," Jimin used to admit with an embarrassed laugh. "Get cavities, maybe. You don't sound concerned. More afraid of regret than cavities." At the time Jungkook had laughed, now those words returned with a painful clarity. The front door opened. Jimin stepped outside carrying a box of art supplies. He looked briefly surprised. "Early. I didn't want to be late." Jimin noticed the bakery bag. "You remembered. I forgot too many things already." A second Jimin simply looked at him before accepting the bag. "Thank you." It was a small gesture, but it felt like the first brick placed in rebuilding a bridge that had once collapsed. Inside the community center, volunteers bustled through the halls preparing for the weekend festival. Children laughed while decorating paper lanterns, colorful ribbons hung from the ceiling, and the scent of fresh paint mixed with baked cookies drifting from the kitchen. Without being asked, Jungkook rolled up his sleeves. "What needs to be done?" Jimin blinked. "You don't have to help." "I know, I want to." Within minutes, Jungkook found himself carrying tables, hanging decorations, repairing a loose bookshelf, and helping children inflate balloons. At first, everyone watched him curiously. Eventually, they simply accepted him. One energetic little boy ran over carrying a tangled string of lights. "Mister, can you fix this?" Jungkook crouched beside him. "Try." Boy smiled brightly. "Teacher Jimin fixes everything." Jungkook glanced across the room. Jimin was kneeling beside two little girls, patiently showing them how to fold colorful paper cranes. He looked happy, not because life had been easy, because he had chosen kindness despite everything life had taken from him. Jungkook admired that more than he could express. Around noon, the festival officially began. Parents filled the courtyard while children performed songs and dances on a small wooden stage. Applause echoed beneath strings of colorful lanterns swaying gently in the summer breeze. Jungkook stood near the back, watching quietly. He wasn't there to reclaim a place in Jimin's life. He was there because Jimin had invited him. That alone felt precious. After the performances ended, everyone gathered for lunch beneath white tents. An elderly volunteer approached Jungkook with a warm smile. "So you're the famous friend." Jungkook looked confused. "Famous?" The woman chuckled. "Jimin never mentioned your name." His smile faded slightly, but whenever it rained, she glanced toward Jimin, who was laughing with several children. He became strangely quiet. Jungkook felt his heart sink. He always looked toward the door. The elderly woman sighed gently. "I think a part of him expected someone." Jungkook lowered his eyes. "I made him wait." There was no accusation in her voice, only truth, but waiting didn't make him bitter. She smiled softly. It made him kinder. Jungkook watched Jimin from afar. He wondered how many rainy afternoons Jimin had spent hopping to hear familiar footsteps, how many birthdays had passed, how many messages had been written and erased before they were ever sent. That evening, after everyone had gone home, the courtyard became peaceful again. Lanterns glowed softly as the sky turned shades of orange and purple. Jimin and Jungkook folded empty chairs together. Neither hurried to fill the silence. Finally, Jimin spoke. "Do you remember the hill outside the city?" Jungkook smiled faintly. "The one where we watched meteor showers?" Jimin nodded. "I haven't been back since you left." Jungkook looked at him. "I was afraid the memories would hurt too much." Now Jimin considered the question. "They still hurt." He smiled gently. "But maybe memories aren't meant to disappear." He lifted another chair. "Maybe they're meant to remind us what deserves another chance." Jungkook looked at him, unsure whether he had heard correctly. "Another chance?" Jimin met his eyes. "I'm not saying everything is fixed. I know. I'm saying." He hesitated, searching for the right words. "I'm willing to see who you've become." A warm breeze drifted through the courtyard, carrying the scent of blooming jasmine. For the first time since returning home, Jungkook felt hope outweigh regret. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't love restored overnight. It was something quieter, something far more fragile. Trust beginning to grow again, one honest moment at a time. As they walked toward the exit together, their shoulders brushed accidentally. Neither stepped away, neither spoke about it. Some distances could never be erased in a single day, but others began to disappear with the smallest steps taken side by side. A week later, the evening sky stretched across the city in shades of amber and violet as Jimin and Jungkook stood at the foot of the familiar hill they had not climbed together in years. The narrow trail was unchanged. Wildflowers still swayed beside the path, and the cool breeze carried the scent of pine and damp earth after an afternoon shower. Crickets had already begun their quiet chorus, blending with the distant sounds of the city below. Jimin smiled faintly. "I thought this place would feel smaller." Jungkook looked around. "It doesn't." Jimin glanced toward the summit. "It feels like time simply waited for us." They climbed slowly, neither trying to rush the journey. Every few steps brought back another forgotten memory. "There," Jimin said, pointing toward a weathered oak tree. "You carved our initials." Jungkook laughed softly. "I was terrible with a pocket knife." "You almost cut your thumb." "You laughed instead of helping." "You were pretending to be brave." "I was trying to impress you." Jimin shook his head, amused. "You already had." Jungkook stopped walking. Jimin turned around. "What? I don't think you ever realized that." A faint blush colored Jimin's cheeks before he looked away, pretending to admire the view. By the time they reached the top, the first stars had begun to appear. The city sparkled beneath them like a sea of tiny lights. The same old wooden bench still stood near the edge of the hill, its paint faded by countless seasons. Jimin brushed away a few fallen leaves before sitting down. "I used to come here after you left." Jungkook remained standing. "Often," Jimin nodded. "Whenever life became too loud." He looked toward the horizon. "I'd sit here until sunset and imagine what you might be doing." Jungkook lowered himself onto the bench beside him. "I thought about you too." Jimin smiled gently. "I know." Jungkook looked surprised. "You know, I could feel it." He laughed quietly. "It sounds ridiculous, doesn't people leave completely?" Jimin's eyes reflected the fading light. "You never did." Silence settled comfortably between them. It was no longer heavy. It simply existed, peaceful and unhurried. After several minutes, Jungkook reached into his coat pocket. "I found something while cleaning my apartment." He carefully unfolded a small piece of paper that had yellowed with age. Jimin recognized it immediately. "Bucket list." Jungkook nodded. "We wrote it when we were 20. Jimin laughed as he read the childish handwriting. "Watch a meteor shower." Did travel together, never got the chance. Learn to cook without burning dinner. Jungkook grinned, I still fail at that one. Jimin chuckled, the sound warm and genuine. For a while they simply read the list together, smiling at dreams that had once seemed so easy to achieve. Then Jimin noticed the final line, neither of them had crossed it out. It read simply, never become strangers. The smile slowly disappeared from both their faces. Jungkook swallowed. I broke the only promise that mattered. Jimin folded the paper carefully before handing it back. You did. There was no anger in his voice, only honesty. But we're here now. Jungkook looked at him. I don't know if I deserve another chance. Jimin watched the stars appear one by one, spent years asking whether people deserve forgiveness. He paused. I don't think that's the right question anymore. Is whether they're willing to grow. The words lingered in the cool evening air. Jungkook nodded slowly. Can see that. A gentle breeze swept across the hill. Without thinking, Jimin leaned back against the bench, closing his eyes as the wind brushed through his hair. Jungkook watched him quietly. He wasn't looking at the boy he had loved years ago. He was looking at the man Jimin had become, someone stronger, kinder, and wiser because of everything he had endured. I have a confession, Jungkook said softly. Jimin opened his eyes. When I saw you put that ring on someone else's finger, he smiled sheepishly. I was jealous. Jimin laughed, the sound echoing across the quiet hill. I noticed. Felt like my heart stopped. Almost showed on your face. I thought I'd lost you forever. Jimin's smile softened. You lost my trust. He reached out and gently tapped Jungkook's chest with one finger, but not my ability to care. Jungkook looked down at the spot where Jimin's hand had rested. For the first time in years, hope no longer felt like a distant dream. It felt real, not because the past had disappeared, but because they were finally facing the future together, one honest conversation at a time. As darkness settled over the hill, they remained on the old wooden bench, watching the stars emerge across the endless sky. Neither of them spoke again. They didn't need to. Some feelings, after waiting so many years, were finally finding their way home, not through grand declarations, but through quiet moments shared beneath the same sky. The days that followed unfolded with a quiet rhythm neither Jimin nor Jungkook had expected. There were no dramatic confessions, no desperate promises, only ordinary moments that slowly stitched together the years they had lost. On Monday morning, Jungkook arrived at the community center carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate instead of coffee. Jimin looked at the cup in surprise. You remembered. You stopped drinking coffee whenever you were stressed. Jimin accepted the drink with a small smile. You really do remember everything. Everything. Jungkook looked down. I forgot how much time matters. Jimin said nothing, but the silence between them felt gentler than before. Throughout the morning, they organized books for the children's reading corner. Dust floated through the sunlight streaming from the tall windows, and the quiet rustle of turning pages filled the room. One little girl wandered over, hugging a stuffed rabbit. Teacher Jimin. Yes, are you and Mr. Jungkook friends? Jimin glanced toward Jungkook, who was carefully arranging books on the highest shelf. He smiled. We're learning how to be. The little girl frowned thoughtfully. Can people learn that? They can. If they forgot, Jimin gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Especially then. Child nodded as though the answer made perfect sense before skipping away. Jungkook had heard every word. He smiled to himself. That afternoon, rain began falling without warning. The children rushed to the windows, cheering as droplets raced across the glass. Jimin remained still. Rain had always awakened old memories, Jungkook noticed. Without saying a word, he walked to the storage closet and returned with 2 umbrellas. He handed one to Jimin. Old time's sake, Jimin laughed softly. You still remember our walks in the rain. I remember every one of them. When the day's activities ended, they stepped outside together. The street shimmered beneath the rain, reflecting colorful shop signs like scattered watercolor paintings. The cool air smelled of wet pavement and blooming jasmine. Instead of opening separate umbrellas, Jimin unfolded only one. Jungkook looked at him. Get soaked. Used to share. Jungkook hesitated only a moment before stepping beside him. The umbrella wasn't large enough. Their shoulders touched. Occasionally their hands brushed as they walked. Neither moved away. For several peaceful minutes they wandered through familiar streets without speaking. The city seemed quieter beneath the steady rain. Eventually they stopped outside the tiny jewelry shop they had visited years ago. The wooden sign above the entrance had faded, but the warm yellow lights inside remained unchanged. Jimin looked through the window. I heard the old owner retired. Jungkook nodded. His granddaughter runs it now. Neither of them entered immediately. Instead, they simply stood there remembering. I used to think about that ring, Jungkook admitted. So did I. I almost bought it after I came back. Jimin looked at him with quiet curiosity. Why didn't you? Because I realized a ring can't repair broken trust. Jimin smiled. No, has to come afterward. A warm expression spread across Jimin's face. Different? I hope so. Jimin shook his head gently. No so. They finally stepped inside. The shop still smelled of polished wood and fresh flowers. Display cases sparkled beneath soft lighting. A young woman greeted them warmly. Welcome. As they browsed quietly, Jungkook noticed something familiar resting in one corner of the display. A simple silver ring, 2 delicate lines crossing before becoming one, exactly like the design from years ago. He stared at it for a long moment before quietly stepping back. Jimin noticed. You aren't going to ask about it? Jungkook smiled. Today, why? Because I don't want to give you a promise. Jimin looked confused. Jungkook met his eyes. I want to become one. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Jimin reached over and gently squeezed Jungkook's hand. It lasted only a moment. but it was the first time either of them had crossed that distance willingly since Jungkook returned. There was no rush, no pressure, only a quiet understanding that some relationships were not rebuilt through grand gestures, but through countless small choices made every single day. As they left the shop together, the rain had already begun to fade. Clouds slowly parted, revealing a soft evening sky washed in shades of gold. Jimin looked upward and smiled. It finally stopped. Jungkook followed his gaze. Maybe it's our turn to start again. Jimin didn't answer with words. Instead, he continued walking beside Jungkook at the same steady pace, their shoulders brushing lightly with every few steps, as if both of them had silently chosen the same direction, not just for the walk home, but for whatever tomorrow might bring. Months passed and life settled into a quiet kind of happiness, not the perfect happiness found in fairy tales. The real kind, the kind that was built one conversation, one apology, and one act of trust at a time. Jungkook never missed another Saturday at the community center. Sometimes he helped children with their drawings. Sometimes he repaired broken shelves or carried heavy boxes. Other times he simply sat in the reading corner, listening as Jimin told stories that made every child believe kindness could change the world. The volunteers gradually stopped calling him Jimin's old friend. Instead, they simply smiled whenever the two arrived together. One crisp autumn afternoon, the community center celebrated its anniversary. Colorful lanterns decorated the garden, children ran across the grass wearing handmade paper crowns, and laughter floated through the cool air. Jimin watched everything with quiet contentment. This place feels different, he said. Jungkook looked around. Why? It feels fuller, he smiled. Maybe because you're here. Jungkook lowered his head with a shy laugh. I spent years believing love was proven through big sacrifices. Now, I've learned it's proven by staying. Jimin looked at him for a long moment before gently intertwining their fingers. Neither of them felt the need to hide anymore. As the celebration ended and the evening sky filled with soft shades of orange, the children gathered around them. One little boy tilted his head curiously. Teacher Jimin? Yes. Is Mr. Jungkook your family? Jimin looked at Jungkook. Years ago, that question would have frightened them. Now it only made him smile. He squeezed Jungkook's hand a little tighter. He is. Answer was simple. It carried no dramatic declaration, only certainty. Weeks later, on the first rainy evening of winter, Jungkook invited Jimin back to the hill where so many memories had begun. Rain fell gently just as it had years before. The old wooden bench remained beneath the oak tree, weathered but strong. Jungkook reached into his coat pocket and carefully placed a small velvet box on the bench between them. He did not open it immediately. Instead, he looked at Jimin. 3 years ago, I thought a ring could tell someone I loved them. He smiled softly. I was wrong. Jimin listened quietly. A ring can't replace trust. It can't erase pain, can't recover lost years. He took a slow breath. But after everything we've rebuilt together, I hope it can become a symbol of the future instead of the past. Only then did he open the box. Inside rested a simple silver ring, 2 delicate lines crossed before becoming one, the same design they had admired years ago. Jimin's eyes filled with tears, not because of the ring, because of everything it represented: patience, growth, forgiveness, choosing each other again. Jungkook did not rush him. He simply asked with complete sincerity, will you let me keep walking beside you? Jimin smiled through his tears. I thought you'd never ask. He extended his hand. With gentle, steady fingers, Jungkook slipped the silver ring onto Jimin's hand. This time there was no audience, no applause, no misunderstanding, only the quiet sound of rain falling through the trees and 2 hearts finally free from the weight of unspoken words. Jimin laughed softly. You know, what? When I saw you standing outside the community center that day, I wanted to forgive you immediately. Didn't you? Because I needed to know you weren't just coming back. He looked into Jungkook's eyes. I needed to know you were staying. Jungkook smiled. I will. I know. They stood together beneath a single umbrella as the rain continued to fall around them. Years earlier, silence had separated them. Now silence felt peaceful because nothing important was left unsaid. The silver ring reflected the faint glow of the evening sky. It was never about possessing someone's heart. It was about earning the privilege of protecting it. And in the end, Jungkook realized that love was not found in the moment someone placed a ring on another person's finger. Love was found in every ordinary day afterward, when 2 people continued choosing each other despite the scars, the regrets, and the years they could never reclaim. Together they walked down the hill at an unhurried pace, hand in hand, leaving behind the place where they had once mourned what was lost and carrying with them a future they had finally learned to build together. The end.